Pretty cool. All right, man. So, what's blossoming besides your career?
Well, like the email says, the blue bonnets have busted out and have started popping in Austin. So it's always a sign. But what has also happened is the blue bonnets popped out. I noticed them the other day, and the temperature went from 95 yesterday to 40 today. So it's the bipolar Texas spring weather. It's always interesting.
All right. So it's 40 now, but probably next week it's going to be back to normal. So
Oh,
what
it'll
happens then?
probably a couple days it'll be back up to 85 to 95. I don't know. I don't keep up because I can't keep up. It changes so rapidly.
All right. Yeah, but as soon as it turns 85, what are people doing? They're going to go out and go run, and what are they going to do? They're going to run and tear an Achilles? What are they going to do?
Well, they get out and they're active, and a lot of people have been pretty lazy over Christmas. And I shouldn't say a lot of people, but there's a common theme of laziness over the holidays going into the new year. Even though people get motivated for the new year in January, they end up in a situation where by the time the weather actually gets good, there's problems that are going on that are lurking in their body from inactivity over the winter, from getting dormant or from getting tight. As we talk about the idea of stretching, right? A lot of people will not get out and about with their winter program, and they'll do a lot of static stretching and things in the house that maybe aren't the best for you. So as people are getting out and about and doing things, hiking, getting out and playing pickleball, getting out and walking the lake, walking town lake, there's a sense of is my body ready for it? And one of the main things that I like to say is, hey, it's time to start getting ready for activity because only activity spikes up as the weather gets warmer here in Texas and people are out and about from now until about November. It'll be a pretty active season, or until it gets 100 degrees out and then people aren't doing anything for a little bit.
Okay. So I went out to play tennis the other day, and what was bothering me was whatever the muscle is that lifts your legs up. Is that the adductor?
In the front of your leg?
Yeah, the front of my leg around my hips. Lifting this
Oh, that's your
muscle,
hip.
whatever makes
That
my legs come up, was
that's your hip
hurting.
flexors. Yeah,
That's my hip flexors.
that's your hip flexors. That's your psoas, your iliacus. Part of your quad helps with that, but it's mostly your hip flexors. Which the hip flexors are back to that inactivity point of life. That's where people that sit all day for work or they sit for long hours in the commute. That's where those muscles get extremely tight and typically extremely weak. Because tightness in many situations doesn't really ever mean strength. Usually tightness has an association with weakness. So those hip flexors get tight, they get weak, and then you get some imbalances, especially if you're like trying to go out hiking and you have to like step up on a big step, things like that. If you're walking on level ground, maybe not so noticeable, but as you're getting out and about and being more active on, say, the trails, that's going to be a scenario where you'll notice that.
So they feel tight, but what that really is they've become weak.
Exactly. It's both. It's a tightness and a weakness. And the tightness is from sitting or excessive positions in a shortened, excessive amount of time in a shortened position has created a tightness. But the muscle is weak as well because it's not going through its full range of motion. So let's just use the example of your bicep. Like if your bicep here, if you only straighten your elbow to here over time, it gets tight. It doesn't get strong, it gets weak in that range. And by not going into that range of motion at the end, we have tightness here that causes imbalances. So if you have a tightness in your hip flexor, it's also going to be a weakness. And that weakness is going to be a scenario where when you need to lift that leg, or if you're in a dynamic sport like reaching or going side to side, not reaching with your leg, but when you step to reach to hit that ball, all of a sudden you have to have that strength, that stability, and you got to have a little bit of coordination putting it all together.
And I guess that full range of motion that you should have access to.
Exactly. Exactly. So when you sit for long periods of time and then you stand up, it's kind of like what I was talking about, the elbow straightening. You can't quite straighten up all the way because your hip flexors are pulling you down a little bit from the hip. and then you start trying to walk or do activities from there, and then you get into some struggles.
Okay. All right. So in your latest newsletter, you talk about things to do to warm up. So walk me through that.
Well, warming up is a scenario where static stretching was something that was done so often and so long, and it's really not what is accepted as the go-to thing to do now. Dynamic stretching is much more involved. I like to say, how can we figure out a way to loosen up those tight muscles? And whatever it is to loosen up those tight muscles, we need to loosen them up first. Then we need to get out and do our activity instead of trying to do our activity in the tightness. So, for those hip flexors, for example, you go about that in a situation where, okay, there's many ways to skin a cat. The most common thing people will do is say, hey, your hip flexors are tight. Get in a one leg forward, one leg kneeling. So, you're on, let's say, your right knee and your left foot's in front of you, and then you lunge forward to stretch your hip flexor in the back, the one that's kneeling. Well, that's basically a static stretch that we've been talking about. So I'm not a fan of that type of stretch because there's nothing dynamic to it. Or if you're going to do a static stretch, then it's very important to follow it up with a immediate strengthening activity. So let's say you are going to do that static stretch, then you grab a TheraBand and immediately do some resistive hip flexion where you're going right into a strengthening component of that. So then all of a sudden you've combined stretching statically, which isn't the best, but you followed it up right with some active components of strengthening the same muscle. So that's some ideas for the hip flexor. But
Okay,
the
great.
hip flexor and the hip flexor is one of the most common things that I deal with when it comes to back pain, hip pain, knee issues because of the sitting. We all sit too much. And that sitting leads to so many problems when you're talking about, 40, 50, 60 hours a week at the office that people work a lot these days. And then you talk about, well, some people work at home, but some people still commute 5, 10 hours a week on top of that, sitting in a car. And then you get home from work. What do you do? A lot of times you sit on the couch, you sit at the dinner table, you sit when you eat. At the end of the day, you're sitting watching Netflix, whatever you're doing. So again, the sitting is the culprit for the situation that leads to so many problems. And then we try to go be active, and whatever that activity is, whether we're going walking, hiking, playing pickleball, playing tennis, playing basketball, running, then we have an issue because the hip flexors are not as lengthened or as strong as they should be.
Okay. All right. Um, Great. So let's let everybody know that I think by like Friday we should put together a blog post about what we're talking about here, link to some products that you want them to check out, and make sure that they're nice and loose for
Yeah.
the spring. Okay, great. All right. I think that's all I need from you today. Is there anything else you want to share?
Well, one of the things in the email talked about doing some like single leg stance activities where you stand on one leg. One of the main things with standing on one leg is that you're now challenging and using these little muscles in the body that don't get worked with the big activities. So that's not really a dynamic stretch, but that's a fantastic many muscles are having micro contractions at the same time. So you're stabilizing your ankle, you're stabilizing your knee, you're stabilizing your hip, you're stabilizing your trunk, and it's all working in this like down from the body down to the ankle and back up. Now, talking about products, one of my favorite products is something called a Bosu ball, BOSU ball, and it's a half of a big exercise ball. It's one of those huge exercise balls, so like 50, 60 centimeters. All of a sudden, you cut it in half, and it has a solid base on the bottom and a round on top. Or you can turn it upside down, and now you have a round on the bottom and a flat on top. So that's one of my favorite tools to teach my patients to use is the Bosu because you can do tons of balance work on it. You can also do strengthening work on it, and it's endless with the things that you can do on it. So as we talk about products, that's one of my favorites. But then as we go back to what I was just talking about with the TheraBand, there's that hip flexion exercise where you stand on basically a Thera loop. You have the loop around both of your feet, and you bring one knee up towards your chest. And when you bring that one knee up towards your chest, you're actually starting to strengthen the hip flexor because many people stretch the hip flexor, many people release the hip flexor, but there's not enough strengthening of it as well on top of that releasing or stretching. So two products that I like a lot that go along with the email that just went out when it talks about stretching, and it talks about following it up with strengthening, and then with some balance work on the one leg, and the Bosu takes it up to a completely different challenge.
Great. Yeah, I don't know about people watching, but for me, strengthening that hip flexor, that sounds like that's what I need to do for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a very common thing, that is for sure.
Because I think about stretching it and lengthening it, but I don't think about strengthening it. Okay.
And the hip flexor is weird. I mean, from an anatomy standpoint, if you're looking, as the muscles coming this way, if you're facing this, facing to the side, the way that muscle comes down is it sits on the front of your spine, but then it goes forward around your pelvic bone, and then it goes back and wraps around the back of your femur. So it does this weird, I like to call it's like a snake tail, and it's like the tail is wrapping down and around to hold on to the tree or something. But there's no really other muscles in the body. Most of them are just like, they're just long and lengthened. This has these like turns in it, 90-degree turns and twists and turns. So it makes it a very different muscle and a difficult muscle to stretch dynamically or actively or passively, statically, because of the uniqueness of its anatomy.
Okay. Okay. Cool, man. Well, that's all I need. I know we try to keep these short so people can watch them and make sure they know that they don't have to listen to it forever or be online for more than 20 minutes. But thank you, man.
Yeah, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
All right. You have a good day.
You too. Bye. Let's see.